was a really big part of the record, and I mean, you can hear it as well on the album. Basically, there's a great musician in the UK called Robin Hitchcock, and he put together a tour in February of last year called Floating Palace, and he put 6 musicians together, and 2 of them were me and Hau Gelb, who's the frontman of Giant Sand out of Tucson, Arizona. And Hau and I really hit it off, just really made friends, and we were such polar opposite musicians, where he's this maverick, desert punk, nonconformist, and I come from a pretty formulaic, traditional pop song background. And it was such an interesting meeting of minds and we listened to our own music. We had like a kind of teenage split jack in our iPhone. We're listening to each other's music, and I was listening to mine through his ears, just going, God, it's so busy and it's so layered and there's so much going on, you can't even hear my voice, and it's so fast. And he was saying, oh my God, I sound like I'm gonna die any minute, and it's so slow. And we just thought we could really meet somewhere interesting in the middle. And he said, come out to Arizona and try recording in Wavelab, this great studio where he works. So really it was more of an experiment than a solid idea to make an album. The idea had always been to go over there and then record straight onto old tape machine and just do live performances and see what happened. I wasn't intending on having a cachet of songs to take with me, but Hau asked me if I wanted to go in February, and I was going in April, and in that 2 months I wrote 9 songs, which is really unlike me. I would usually do one at a time, and they'd take a little longer than that. The writing itself can take an afternoon, but it's the space in between songs. Usually it would take me longer. And this was like this old-fashioned kind of fairground game of all the horses going at once, and I kept getting very stressed that I was starting another song, just thinking, oh man, I've not finished that other one. And then they all came in at the same time, and I suddenly had this, you know, half an album's worth of material that I really felt confident about too. It wasn't just material spilling out that was varied quality for me. It all felt like it was strong material. So the first half of the record, yes, I went out and really just laid down those tracks in that atmosphere and in that ambience that Hau created with some of the other Giant Sand musicians and Hau. And the second half of it was really very different, because I had such a kind of tumultuous summer where everything changed for me. And I was almost a different person by the time I went out to do the second half, which is why the record is in 2 halves. We were much bolder and much freer and much less, and I wrote quite a bit of the material out there, some of it with Hau. So it was kind of a more soupy feeling to the second half, and more like Hau's way of working, that second half, which was very exciting to do things in a different way. I think the record for me is like an emotional road trip. I mean, to me it does sound like travelling music, and it was definitely a very intense journey that this music came out of. To warn people, it's not a morbid record, and it's not a breakup record. It's the easiest record I've written, and the songs just came very naturally, and they were rarely very specifically about single things. It was kind of a broader spectrum with the songs. I'm a huge fan of the first track on an album. I'll get very attached to it. It's like the gateway. It kind of sets the scene of what you're going to get. It's the doorway into an album. And I'd got back into listening to vinyl, and I was just so delighted by that time that you have where the first side finishes and there's a pause and you realise the record is skipping, and you then turn it over. And also the way that you digest the vinyl LP is you can put the second side on first if you want, if you haven't listened to the second side of it enough. I think the second half of CD albums probably get ignored a bit because you don't maybe have time to listen to the whole thing, and you always go from the start. But with vinyl, you'll often put the B-side on. You also get 2 first tracks, which I just think is great. So that's why I've used the first 2 title tracks as the album title. The first half, Invisible Empire, is quite introspective, quite melancholic and internal. And it was before these big changes had happened in my life, and they have a really weird psychic quality to them. And Hau mentioned this has happened to him too, where you write, and I'm sure other songwriters would say the same, that you almost fortune tell with your songwriting, that you're not quite sure what you're writing, but your subconscious is projecting what's coming before you're aware of it. And so the first half, the songs were very spookily brought into much sharper focus a few months after I'd recorded them. And I just thought, how did I know that it was so relevant to what was happening in a completely different way from when I'd written them. An invisible empire is really about the situation where you'll create a life, you'll create this fabulous city in your mind, just seeing things the way that you want to see them and seeing people the way that you want to see them, and you're just ignoring some of the truth to make it look the way you want it to look. And there's an inevitability that that will crumble if it isn't real, if there's a denial. Where Invisible Empire is a kind of Wizard of Oz attempt of trying to be in control and trying to make things the way you want them. Crescent Moon is very much about nature taking over and a rebirth of things and letting go and letting things be as they should be. And acceptance, I think. The cover shot is taken, it's the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. So if you take Star, I think it's Star, or Gates Pass I think it's called. You basically go kind of south through Tucson and take a left. And then you drive all the way out to the desert, and there's this fantastic pass, which I think is called Gates Pass. There's just a car park at the side, but basically you stand on the edge of it and it is just the most staggering landscape. One of the most staggering landscapes I've ever seen. And I had a really great relationship with the photographer. She's a good friend of mine called Jane Mingay, and she's been a photojournalist for a long time, so she's wearing bulletproof vests out in Kabul and, I mean, really covering some hard stuff. And she'd not done portraiture before, and she asked if I would be up for her taking my photo. And it's been a relationship I've really craved for a long time, to find someone to help me take my imagery to a different level, because in the past I've been very reticent to get involved, because as a female artist, right from the start I was just like, I don't want to be part of that. I don't want the imagery, I don't want I like fashion, but it's not a big part of my life. I've never been able to use it in an expressive way or been interested to do that. And then this album was the first time in my whole career where I've just gone, I know what I want to wear, I know what I want to look like, this is the spirit, this is the character. I found the hat and I was like, this is the hat! And Jane and I just had this fantastic kind of Thelma and Louise experience of borrowing Hal Gelb's 1965 white Barracuda vintage car and just disappearing into the desert for a couple of mornings, and just the two of us just doing all the photos and filming. And it's been a real kind of breath of fresh air for me for the imagery to become a really genuine part of the expression for me, because it hasn't really been that before.